Very good.
Well, I would like to say that I concur with Mr. James and Dr. Lashley. They have basically touched areas of politics. Dr. James spoke about the diversification, for want of a better word, of the government that reflected the community. And I think that is one when the government reflects the community. And Dr. A.N.I. Robinson was very determined to do that, and he did that. That is one way that we can start to eliminate its impact when people in the community of different ethnicities are represented at the governmental level. Yes, that is very important. And Mr. James made an important point. Dr. Lashley spoke about education. Life is about education. Life is about education. And just I just want to go back to definition. Education involves definition, right? Because we have this discussion tonight, but we really did not define the word racism. Racism, and there's so many different definitions of racism, but I'm using the definitions from Social Science Encyclopedia, which says racism is the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. Growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, we always had a problem of race. It was not as bad as in Guyana, where they had what was akin to a civil war between the Indians and the Negroes. Those were the terms used back then. Racism is an evil that dates back to the very beginning of time. And God never categorized his children by race. The only race that is referred to in the Bible is the race that we must run and win. God categorized his children by nation, kindred, tongues, and people. And so growing up, I used to ask myself the question growing up. I used to say, I don't understand why people have to be racist. I don't understand racism. But many years ago, I looked at racism through the prism of other isms, like colorism, which is a problem even in our Black community. Colorism, maybe on another one of your shows we can discuss that, but that is an issue. And so I understand racism through that prism of colorism and through other isms. I am better than you. Even in our churches, we have that, right? And so racism is an evil. It is an evil that I don't think that we can ever eliminate racism. We can work to minimize impact, but it is going to happen. It's going to exist until Jesus comes. But pointing to the question tonight, and Mr. J and also Dr. Lashley basically answered, I would say in a very, capsulize it in a very good way. Education, education, education. Of course, as we know, the foci of education really is knowledge and behavior change. So as Dr. Lashley say, our curriculum in our schools, as Mr. James say, yes?
So you just define your doctorate there. What kind of doctor are you?
I'm a doctor of public health. I'm a doctor of public health.
Human
and
behavior.
Of course, racism and its effect and impact is a public health issue.
Yes, it is.
It is a public health issue. And so in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a number of different races. Well, as Mr. James said, we probably should say ethnicities. And I agree with that too. And wherever there are different ethnicities, there will be some modicum of conflict. And there can be healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. So in Trinidad, we have that. We have two parties in Trinidad. One party is looked at as the party of the Black man still, even though there are some Indian representatives. And the other party is looked at as the party of Indians, even though there are some Black representatives in that party. And so we have to minimize the impact of racism, and we can only do so, and I'm piggybacking again on Dr. Lashley, through education, education, education. We have to educate people. We have to educate our children. We have to let our children understand that we are God's children. We are part of the human race. We are one people. And of course, as Mr. James said, we have to we have to make sure that the people who represent us are people who look like us in our government. It's a multiracial government, and right now I think the government has a Chinese minister, an Indian minister, a Lebanese minister. So that's good. That's a good thing. We have to start there, but we can never eliminate racism, but we can minimize the impact. We can minimize the impact. There are things we can do.
So you are saying that we could never eliminate. We're going to come to your 5 minutes that we gave is also up, but you will get a chance to come back.
I'd like to say something, Coco. Yes. So for the purposes of this discussion, I think we need to clarify race and ethnicity, because I think we're going to end up getting lost in the weeds. So despite saying there is one human race, we know, though we don't like it, though we know it's a social construct, as constructed, race is based on physical traits, ethnicity is based on cultural identity. So for example, if you look at the East Indian race in Trinidad and Tobago, you can then break it down into different ethnic groups, ethnic origins that came from East India. But we're speaking to physical traits. While it's not a comfortable conversation, that's what we're talking about, because that is what the issue as it relates to politics, as it relates to most of the conversations around education, employment, social ascent in Trinidad and Tobago, most of it is centered on race. So I'd like us to just keep that definition clear for the purposes of tonight, which is, while ethnicity sounds cleaner to say, it actually is referring more to cultural traditions.
Yes.
Indeed, we know that while they're all brought from East India, they were brought from multiple different backgrounds, some of whom were Muslim, had certain Muslim traditions, even within the Muslim tradition, different types, those coming from Hindu tradition, different types of tradition, those coming from regional ethnic differences. But this conversation tonight is really geared toward the physical trait, which is how people who define each other, and also where the violence comes in, including the violence of the language around race. Because violence isn't always physical violence, but we do use a lot of violent language in the country of Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to race and how we refer to people's physical traits. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I just wanted to come in and clarify that, because we need to stick to that part of the discussion and not get lost in the weeds, because, you know, the thing is, we have an aspirational goal, right? Because I agree, if you look at the makeup right now of the parliament, particularly those in leadership, it looks that way. But this is where you start asking, is it party versus race versus politics? And that's where I think that we need to clarify. So thank you.
Yes, because what I was trying to impress on everyone, the whole question is long, but there is a question at the end of this question that makes it important that we go after it. How can we decrease or eliminate its impact on politics? We're not going there. Everybody just staying away speaking about the race or ethnicity, knowing that some place in the world they have something they call ethnic cleansing. Are we going into that word? Can we be able to define our answers when we get into the real, into the fine print of ethnicity? We are going to remain on race, and we are going to keep this clean and real here. Mr. James, you will have a little chance to come back to tell us right here how we are going to, what you see that we can do. But first we have Avanell Hazel.
Hi. So like Professor Earl, I kind of want to also go into the teaching moments where I can better define. So Professor Earl really gave a good definition on racism, but I want to hit a little further because there are different types of racism. And the one that I want to talk with in regards to this question is the systemic or institutionalized racism. And it refers to the different accesses to goods, services, resources, and opportunities afforded to racial groups. In part, society makes it normal and for people to have and gain access to these sorry, lost my train of thought. Society makes it normal for us to gain access to these infrastructures. And this is the necessary norms that we know it. However, we have come to realize that even that in itself, people are actually being discriminated against. You have people who don't get to have equal pay, equal equity within, you know, the jobs that they're doing, the way that they're treated. And we have to kind of bring back some level of equity when it comes to the, you know, to the workplace. We have these unconscious biases that we carry. And we have to kind of hit key on the word privilege, because privilege doesn't just go to white and black. Privilege can be within our Black community based on status, how much money you are making. That's a privilege in itself. And to get away and eliminate that systemic problem we have within our political group, they have to start treating people as equals. We have to actively work towards eradicating it from our organizations, starting with the top, the politics. We need to be comfortable for calling it what it is. Racism is racism. We have to call it out. And when we notice people doing the wrong things, we have to say, you know what? We have to call them out. You shouldn't have those conversations. That is not how you call these people. That is not what we have to realize, that our words can hurt. You know, and when discussing racism, we have to also realize that it's normal. It is absolutely normal to be defensive based on the topic. But after several conversations, you should be free in your feelings. That after a while, that should not be a problem. That defense mechanism that you make up, you get defensive. After a while of having that conversation, if it's hard, we will feel more comfortable in having the conversation. So we have to get to a level of comfortability where we are comfortable within our own skin, that we're able to broach those conversations and those topics.
Thank you so much, Avanel. We get 1.5 minutes here remaining for Mr. Anthony James to tell us about this politics, because you are the man of politics. Tell us where we go wrong and what can we do to eliminate or to decrease what's happening, like every election time.
You see,
racism have to end.
In the beginning was the word. That is the most powerful philosophy ever. In the beginning was the word. So at the beginning of any undertaking, there must be the word. The word there also means the philosophy. What are we now setting about? So we are beginning to do what? How is it going to end? What is the journey? What are we trying to achieve? So what is the word? You have to set the word at the beginning. When you understand the word or the objective or the philosophy, then you can now put plans and programs in place to accomplish that. And so that the word or the philosophy, the objective, has to be known throughout. And this is where Dr. Earl and Dr. Lashley who have spoken about education. So the education has to be based on the word.
So can you give us the objective here?
Right. So that, but the leaders really have not led with that objective. What you really think?
Let's get to it.
Let me get to the point there.
Yes.
Right. So first of all, you must have the objective. But let us come down, because we can't be naive. If you're going to get respect, and what is subconsciously where the question is coming from, what has really influenced this discourse is the large demographic divide in Trinidad between the Africans, and we must be very careful to connect the identity of our people to land, history, and culture. As I said, if we are here, this is a responsible forum. Africans are not black people. Black is a social engineering. We have to be true to that. It's a caste system, and it is repeated every day in America, so it becomes normal. But we must reject it. That's a caste system. But we are dealing here, as I said, subconsciously, with the large demographic divide in Trinidad between Africans and the Indians. Now, the Indians have come and they have not lost culture. As I have said, I don't know if I said it here before, but I'm often engaged in this discussion. I chatted with a businessman in Tobago. He's now deceased. And he told me he came to Tobago at the age of 14. He left school in second year. He took in standard 2. And I'm telling you, in Tobagonian standards, he was a billionaire before he died. We're talking about culture. Now, if the Africans have no culture, I said the Africans don't need that education system that is going on in the schools. Let me just get quickly, just bear with me here.
Well, we are running up.
Yeah, just hear this, hear this here.
Let's have you.
The gentleman, he told me he's of East Indian descent, or East Indian, that his children and grandchildren, they passed their SEA or common entrance, as we used to call it, and he did not send them to school. But he said he calculated, he said, Mr. James, I calculated the amount of money that I would have spent to send them to school. And he gave them that same money to set up business. And all of them today are millionaires. What we have here in the education system for Africans, we're having people reaching up to PhD level, but they're still poor. If I have my way, I will restructure the education system, because what was destroyed in captivity, the Africans suffered tremendous loss, and we need to be rewired, we need to be reprogrammed, reconstructed into business, because business is normal. We are calling business risk. And the Indians are not seeing risk. All they are seeing is opportunity. So we need to have in the school an actual program where the parents must prepare goods, and send the children to school, and they have a trade fair going on every week, if not every day, because we have to engage in rewiring the African. I'm saying that to say, if you don't have if you are not powerful, if you don't have economic empowerment, nobody's going to respect you. We have a situation here right now, in Trinidad and Tobago.
So, you know something? You put down such a great track when you start to talk about the head and leadership.
Yes.
But we kind of moving again in a way where we defining weaknesses of a race and who doing well and who not. We ask the question straight up, what can we do? What do you think we can do?
Well, I'm answering the question.
But time to answer that again is
hear me, Mama Coco.
A question, Brother Anthony.
We
are moving on to another question. Avanel, my co-host, guest, can you read the other question? Please?
Yes. Professor Earl and Dr. Lashley, let's start with the impact of how race intersects with the education in Trinidad and Tobago. What can be done to identify and address any race inequity within the educational system?
Well, I guess you want... Go ahead, Dr. Lashley.
Let Dr. Lashley answer. For Dr. Lashley, you have 5 minutes.
I think he's muted.
Yeah, we are hearing you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
If you look at the University of the West Indies,
I think
can you hear me?
Answer part of this question here. So move along, as you know, because you answered before we even asked the question. So tell us.
If you look at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, you will notice that a certain, especially the female population, you will observe that a certain sector of Trinidad goes to that university even more often than others in sense of race, or let's say ethnicity, but really race. And therefore, you see inequities in the educational system. We have to make sure that the people can get the opportunity to attend the institutions of higher education. And my question is, are we really as a country looking at that to make sure that there is no unevenness? There must be evenness of opportunity so that certain people going into certain programs can have access. It doesn't make sense to have higher education if people really cannot access it as they need. So that's one inequity that we need to look at. Entrance into higher education institutions in Trinidad and Tobago that can flatten the disparity between the groups. For example, we have at this time in Trinidad and Tobago more than 70,000 people of Hispanic descent who have just come. What is the educational plan for those individuals? Are they part of the educational process, or are they going to remain at the bottom of the education ladder? What about the other part goes to curriculum. Therefore, the school should offer business, entrepreneurship, offer areas that people want to get into. Just offering other areas merely to get a degree is not going to take us anywhere. And so I'd like to see that part of the whole structure improve for purposes of access. And then we set up modules for internships so that the various groups can have access to capital and money. That is so critical. We're now with GATE. We know we work with GATE, but GATE is going to diminish access for education to people for graduate degrees, which is where the leadership comes. So I see that interaction there between opportunity, access, and provision of money to help, to help level that gap, to help lessen that gap between the disparities. So that's an area there for me that's critical. The other area is this. If we're going to really grow, why don't we take the people who are doing well in certain economic sectors and get them to help the other sectors? As I grew up in Trinidad, I was back in 1964. When you talk about clothing merchants, there was one group that you talked about. When you talk about certain businesses, there was one group that you talked about. And so different groups seem to have different strengths, but the strengths are not being shared. We have to find a way that people that have access to capital and expertise in certain groups can share that same expertise with people in other groups. And so I'll stop there for a moment, and there may be questions on what I just shared. But again, in summary, let us work it out so that the expertise in different groups can be flooded across and taught to other groups in the curriculum in both informal and formal fashions. For example, when I went to school, they wanted to make me into a doctor. They did not want to make me into a business entrepreneur. Why? Why was that held before me? You become a doctor. But no, if I wanted to become a cloth merchant, oh no, you can't do that. If I want to become a farmer, oh no, you can't do that. That's because of bias. We think that certain groups should only be in certain professions. And that's part of the challenge that we face. We need to go across the board so that children can have a multitude of professions to choose from, and they're not correlated into a profession based on how they look or what they do. It's well known now, others can back me up, that certain populations in Trinidad, their parents encourage them, you go to UWI. When you come out here, you be so-and-so, you go to UWI. But not every group has that same encouragement. And that's part of the challenge that we face.
Well, thank you so much. This is deep. Dr. Duke want to say something, do you?
I think because both Mr. James and Dr. Lashley have struck on something, which we need to describe equity. Because I think when a lot of people hear equity, they think it's just another fancy word for equality, which they're not. They're very different. So equity means sometimes one group needs extra work and extra effort to bring them up to par. so that when you look at them, they look equal, but one group needs more work. And I think that's part of what we're talking about, which is first you have to identify where are the inequities right now in the system. So inequities are like this. For example, you have a child who may have a lot of academic prowess when it comes to understanding science, etc. But if you actually look at what's available to them if they studied science, for them to actually study science, for them to actually participate in the big science fairs, even the simple things of getting tutors, getting all the extra things you need to master that thing they're interested in. There are certain groups, more so certain communities in Trinidad and Tobago, where that's not available to them, right? So it doesn't matter how much raw basic talent they have, they're not going to match up to somebody else whose child might actually be less, as they say, home bright, because they actually have resources to propel them past that point. So that's part of equity. Part of equity is, as they talked about, so teaching business in school is one thing, but the truth is a lot of people are taught business in school, but they have no means to do anything with the business education they were taught once they come out of school, right? So if you're not going to get good seed funding to start a business, you're just a frustrated person who understands business and left to either follow criminality or something because you're not given that leg up to actually pursue the business. If you're going into a bank, where we know the people in the banks are very biased, having dealt with bankers in Trinidad and Tobago myself, bankers who look just like us, Black bankers, and the way they behave in the banks, the language they say to you, they literally tell you they're profiling their fellow Black people who come into them at the bank. You already see that there's another.
If you don't have any teeth in your mouth, she told you that.
Yeah, no. I mean, this isn't me just guessing. I was told what are some of those profiling tactics that are used to determine merit, right? You have people who, they have business acumen, they're interested in starting a business, they apply for $40,000 in grant, be given 1/4 of what's needed. There's no way that person is going to flourish. So instead, once they fail, then people are saying, well, Black people aren't good at business, which isn't true either. But
you didn't give them the money.
So that's where equity comes in. Equity comes in with, if you're going to give them a loan, then are you going to provide all the resources to come make sure their business really takes off? Now, I know there have been a number of small incubator programs, like the thing that's done by the Esplanade that they tried, which is, okay, let's give them affordable, quality business locations so they can do this or that. But again, that education has to be long-term. You have to sort of go alongside with them. And so I think that's important. But going to the beginning of education, I think right now, what you're seeing, if you look at race inequity, and you look amongst the Black communities in Trinidad and Tobago versus the others, for example, and you look at them socioeconomics, because Avanel was right, it's not just race, it's privilege, it's socioeconomics. Part of the issue right now when it comes to inequity in education is access to technology, right? And if your access to technology isn't equal, then you've literally set up one group who has access to do better compared to the other. And that's in any subject area. You've got to know how to integrate technology now, whether it be vocational skills, to the humanities, to the sciences. You have to be able to integrate technology.
Then again, technology, according to location, people in the countryside, you guys can't get good Wi-Fi. You guys can't get a good conversation on a phone before you start to hear doop, doop, doop.
Yeah, so access to the actual infrastructure, right? So if you're going to look at your education and how do you decrease all these inequities, you've got to start from the infrastructure itself. What has the country done for infrastructure? What is the country doing to even make sure the teachers, those who are disseminating the learning and the education, to make sure they're up to speed? Are the teachers also technologically advanced? Are they getting the technological continuing education so they can stay abreast of what their students' needs are going to be? Are you doing enough to make sure that kid who is being sent home with the homework can do it? Are you giving that person who's graduating from high school in Speyside the same access that they'll need if they showed up to college in Trinidad. You know, what's going to happen, right? The other question is, should the college even be in Trinidad, right? Because again, equity and access are super important here. But
so how does equity align with racism? Are we moving away now, or we need real blend equity with racism?
Right. So you can have conversations surrounding racial equity, which is, if you look at many countries around the world, once you realize that you've led one group to have certain privileges over another, you start looking for how do you, again, give that extra hands up or leg up to bring the one group that was historically disenfranchised better. So like we talk about the thing that the Indians came with their culture. Well, the whole story behind how indentureship worked versus how slavery worked, that's not a fault of the Indians, right? The indentureship's contract was a little bit different from slavery's contract. Slavery's contract was literally no contract. They were just beaten into this forced labor, and their identity was white, right? Not even the country you came from. You weren't even sure of where you came from. That's a whole different show, because we could really get into that one. But you know, sorry, go ahead, Earl.
No, I have a question. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what you've been saying relative to equity. I have a question, and anyone in the panel can answer this question. It has been a concern of mine for many years. In Trinidad and Tobago, why is it that when you look at the breakdown in population, the Indians and Negroes, we're about even percentage-wise. But you still find more Indians in engineering school, more Indians in law school, more Indians in medical school. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about Indians that came from the same areas like blacks. Why do you think that is? Does it go back to the family? Because when I was a little boy in Trinidad, before we moved to Tobago, my parents used to take us on Sundays to the airport as part of a little, trip. And we always would see Indian families together. And they all will go to the airport. They all will go to the airport to send one Indian away to Canada or to England, or we hardly ever saw that with black people. And I'm wondering if the family, if going back to that, the family and the structure has anything to do with the fact that though we are similar in percentage in the population, yet there are more Indians completing terminal degrees in engineering and medicine and law. So maybe we can speak to that a little, because it may also speak to some aspect of racism, or equity, or equality. So what do you think, members of the panel?
There's a certain aspect of racism there, but it's not the racism people think of. This speaks back to the structural racism that harkens to colonial times, right? And it harkens back to even the colorism of the time. It harkens back to some of what was done.
I see Mr. James is either he's disinterested or he wants to say something. Can Mr. James answer any part of that question that Brother Earl asked, although that's a new show?
No, it's very integral. It's very integral to what is happening. I want us to really understand that although you try to break down between impact on education and politics and equity, we're really discussing one thing here, because they are all interlocked and affecting each other. And so that what I was saying, if we're not blaming East Indians, they came with a culture, and we have to be fair to the history. When some people came, they came unbroken. They came seeking opportunity. Other people, the majority of people came and laid the foundation. They were dislocated, and we cannot underestimate the impact of that. And that is going to result in the type of society that we have. So we'll be discussing the same thing. Now, you will get no unity. Let's talk about Trinidad, because that's really a Trinidad issue. You will get no unity in Trinidad, because part of unity comes with respect. Now, every time you go to a store, you find one set of people going to another set of people. That's a dangerous scenario that you are talking about. And these people are quite aware of that. In fact, after the last general election, if we can go there are a lot of remarks were made when they come into our stores, let us sell them this and we just up the price. It's all kind of thing. I'm saying, if you want to have a proper sound society, then culturally, educationally, corporately, you have to have the major ethnicities on par. And this is what I believe, without me perhaps not going there, Dr. Duke was,
yes,
that's the equity. That's the equity in the society. So some, as I've been saying, you may not need the same education that I need.
Exactly.
Some need a different type of education. Yes. This is what I was harping. You have to catch them early.
Yeah.
So you have to catch. It's not really a case to like when you reach the bank, because what will happen once you are culturally oriented, the opportunities will come. You will see opportunities. With whatever little you have, you will start to invest. You will start to do this because culturally now you are there. We also have to deal with the politics from the top, because the governments are for it. And there's a major problem, to answer Dr. Earl's question, in terms of why is it you're having more East Indians going into engineering, going into this, going into that? It's the same social fallout that I was referring to. So what happens here is that there's a discussion that has been taking place. One of the reasons Patrick Manning come up with UTT, because there's a scenario taking place at the University of the University of the West Indies, where the leaders there are of a certain ethnicity, and they have been blocking those of the African ethnicity from coming in. So Patrick Manning, I'm telling you, I'm on the ground, and I don't tell lies. Patrick Manning, as a result of that, open UTT in order so that the other ethnicity can come up. It's a fact.
Yeah, so the
thing I really want to discuss these things, because I know, if I say, if you really want to be bold, there has to be affirmative and assertive action, that there must be fair representation, not just in having politicians like a facade to the front. When you go down into the belly, the Africans are nowhere. If we really want to be true to ourselves and true to justice and righteousness, we have to ensure that culturally, educationally, everybody has the opportunity. And the understanding is there now. You know, the Africans have come to realize that. It's just that they have more.
So I want to share something to add to what Anthony's saying and what Earl asked, and I'm going to bring you back to something that was taught in school and probably still taught in Trinidad and Tobago school. So when you're taught the history of Trinidad and Tobago, you know, we're taught that in 1834, the British announced the abolition of slavery, that it takes 4 years for slavery to be ratified. 1838, we're taught that. And then here's where the teaching, right, that seeps into your brain at a young age comes in. We're told that first they went to China and they brought Chinese indentured workers to Trinidad and Tobago. And once your indentureship was done, they were so enterprising and so into business that they started their own businesses and they lost the pool. Now, they're taught that. You're already told.
And you reinforce Chinese in Tobago and Trinidad?
Yes, they were brought just as slavery was ending, they were brought. But I'm getting to the other thing is you're already told at a young age that this is why they're business people to this day, and why you're already primed, Mr. James, to go to that group and expect that they will be the business people. You're told that after that they turned to the Middle East, and they also brought in people from the Middle East. And we're told again the same thing happened. Once their tenure was done, they went into business. I was taught this in school. I'm not making this stuff up. I was taught this in school, so that if I met someone of Middle Eastern heritage, I recognize them as someone from Trinidad and Tobago, but I also recognize that they came to this country and they came here so ready to do business, so ready to excel at business while we didn't want to work because, of course, we were slaves. Now we got our freedom. We weren't going to go back because that's what I was told as part of Trinidad and Tobago's educational curriculum. I was told similar things about when the Fatel Razak arrives and those who could buy their freedom out of indentureship and how they bought land, how they saved money going forward. So when we ask how some of this, how is it? Yes, that's part of it, but it's also reinforced in the very educational system. And slowly but surely, we got that reinforcement that somehow, instead of saying, so slavery was so wrong, and this is what should be done to right the wrong of slavery and help these people and their descendants get to that footing. What we were taught, I mean, I was probably all of 7, 8, 9, learning this stuff already being programmed to accept that. That's a big part of what we have to reconcile, right? Again, that's not something handed down by the Queen. That is us writing our curriculum and reinforcing that.
Doctor, do tell them what the woman
Well said.
Doctor, why you don't be a nurse? You should be a nurse. You shouldn't be a doctor.
Yeah, we have that happen home a lot, right? We have a lot of people, again, like I said, right? And Mr. James knows this because even when he was on our show and I asked him, what is he going to do to go into the schools to not only talk to Black children about electrical careers, but girls, because it also happens there, and then equity goes on so many levels, but you've got equity as it relates to race, equity as it relates to gender, sex and gender, equity as it relates to religion. I mean, we can go down all the layers, which is why I said we're going to stick to race today to remember that we don't get lost in the weeds because we're at 90 minutes. But it's a deep question, but the question isn't one of blame of this group or that group only. It's part of, again, structural stuff. Educational structure is what we were told. We were told that this is how it works. This is why these people have the money and you don't.
So Dr. Duke and Brother Anthony, when we now hearing people calling the people from the Middle Eastern area of the world 1%, and people want to get rid of the 1% people, can you say anything about that?
Well, I don't think you can get rid, if you, as a matter of fact, this society now, there's a certain sect in the society that is so vulnerable, and the 1% has become so essential. If you just get rid of the 1%, the society falls. You know what I'm saying? Society falls if you do that. But more going beyond the question of equity, it's good to start off in the question of equity because of the current inequity and imbalance. But we are dealing with the whole, you see, the East Indian would not cry out for economic equity or for economic, they won't cry because of economic inequity. Their cry is not that. The same 1% you're referring to would not cry out for that. But I'm saying the people who have been damaged